Hello, everybody.
Hello. Checking to see if we're live. Showing
Yeah,
live on YouTube.
see
Hello,
it
YouTube.
on the X.
Hello, X.
Hello, X. Looks like we're all. Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another episode of the Batflip Podcast. Damien, along with David, today we're going to be basically wrapping up everything that has happened since the last episode, which was December 2nd. We're going to go in chronological order of things that have happened. The big moves that you probably wanted to listen about: the Juan Soto's, the Willie Adameses, the everything else. Kyle Tucker. We've done specific episodes with those regarding on our YouTube side. So if you're listening back on podcast platforms and you want to hear more about those moves, go to our YouTube channel, go listen to them and like them over there. This one will be a lot about the other kind of smaller-ish moves that weren't like emergency podcast worthy. But before we get into all that, David, you've had a weekend with Kyle Tucker as a Cub.
Yeah, I've had
What's
a
it been like?
weekend. It was a good weekend. Dang good weekend. Very happy. Put in for my PTO for the holiday. That'll be nice. Parents are coming up to visit over New Year's. That should be lovely. Looking forward to Christmas. But everything's brighter when your team has a superstar. And I'll refrain from further discussing Kyle Tucker because we did talk about him for like an hour on Friday when that dropped. So I'll throw it back to you. How you doing tonight, Damien?
I'm doing great. There's not much you can ask for when your team is World Series champions, and they've
Nope.
already made some pretty big moves this offseason. Now I wish I could say the same thing about my NFL football team, um, because players liking to drop the ball before they cross the goal line, or doing a screen pass that throw it back to your quarterback, who the safety then comes up
Oh,
and pick six it for an interception. Um,
uh,
that is not, and that
all right.
doing that to knock you out of the playoffs too. That is just not a good time.
All right. I've got a question for you. What was worse, the back pass pick six, or the fake punt when Pat McAfee went up and they snapped it to him with no one blocking, like three guys, and he just got sacked on fourth down?
The fake punt.
Yeah, those
That's a
are.
lot worse because at least on the screen backwards pass, like you threw the ball to a receiver. And granted, the receiver then is like fumbling the ball to get it ready. He turns and looks and sees the quarterback is open to throw it back to him.
Yeah.
Like, to throw it back like that, there's no way he saw the safety 10 yards deep
Yeah.
to come and pick the ball. McAfee, you had him like right there with only the center and like five guys right there. And they're like, yeah, we're still going to hike this ball. And it's like, no, that's not good. Don't do that. Um, that was worse.
Oh
But
man. That's our 1 minute segment on football during the
yeah,
Batflip podcast. We always have it. Ashton Genty should have won Heisman also, by the way.
very much got robbed.
Robbed.
But before we move on, if you're wondering why there's only two of us here tonight, Matt decided to tell us that he was just overworked from all the emergency podcasts. He couldn't handle it anymore. He needed at least a 2-week break.
Mm,
So we told him, too bad, that's not going to happen. And he said, screw you, I'm not showing up anyways.
yeah.
Um,
Actually, he's
so we're
helping his
just,
parents with something. He's
yes,
being a good son, and
yeah,
we just have to say Matt sucks out of
yeah,
out of obligation.
yes, yes. Where Matt is helping his parents, it's just we have to give him a hard time in general.
Exactly.
All right, so I think we've done a good job of lasting 4 minutes into our rambling session. So let's jump in to a lot of the moves that have happened now.
Yep.
Like I said, we're going to start in chronological order. So December 3rd on up. The first move we had happen was Aroldis Chapman signing a 1-year, $10.75 million contract with the Boston Red Sox. Chapman last year with Pittsburgh in 61 and 2/3 innings had a 3.79 ERA, actually a 2.96 expected ERA, a 3.04 FIP, a 3.14 FIP. Still kind of the typical Aroldis Chapman, still throws super hard, strikes out a bunch and walks a bunch. Just kind of what you're going to expect. But now he's going from the Yankee side of this rivalry to the Red Sox side.
Yeah. No, this is solid move by Craig Breslow and company, get a guy with Hall of Fame caliber, talent and experience. 10 million for a 1 year reliever deal, especially for guys at this level, seems pretty straightforward. We've seen it with Craig Kimbrell has gotten this. David Robertson's gotten like this exact deal a few times. You just, these older relievers, they're willing to go pitch anywhere, just extend the career. Aroldis Chapman's just trying to pack on numbers to his Hall of Fame case at this point, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
this is great for him. This is a great spot. They're losing Kenley Jansen, so it'll be between Aroldis Chapman and Liam Hendricks probably to close. And knowing Craig Breslow, they'll find somebody else, I think, for this bullpen. But this is just a pure great stuff. Older guy. We kind of thought Chapman might have been on his way out during the Yankees tenure. And since he left, I mean, he's part of the Rangers World Series team. He pitched great with the Pirates last year. As long as you're willing to accept those walks, which we know the Red Sox probably are, it'll be fine. I think this is a rock solid move.
Yeah, I think it's like you said. I think the back end of the bullpen type stuff. Chapman still has electric stuff, so you're not really worried about that. It's just, will he ever have the command that day? Sometimes he's gonna lose you a game, but most of the time he's gonna be pretty solid. Okay, so let's jump over to the next one, which is Luis Severino signing a 3-year, $67 million contract with I can't even say Oakland, Sacramento, just with the Athletics is what we have to say now, apparently. Biggest contract in team history is 3 years, $67 million here. A little interesting note as we're getting ready to talk about Severino, the A's were actually in deep conversations with Sean Manaea to have him return to the team, and that deal kind of fell through, and they pivoted to Severino instead. So, Severino had a real bounce back year, 182 innings, almost 8 Ks per 9, almost 3 walks per 9, but a 391 ERA, a 388 expected ERA. The FIPS are in the 4, but he looked to be really, really solid. And he basically is going to help lead that team. And another deal we'll talk about here in a while as they look to, start off their tenure of playing in the minor league ballpark.
It's funny. And I think we this was kind of our take when this dropped was, why didn't they do this a couple years ago? Like sign a guy to a deal that was big enough to be the team's best deal. It was only $66 million before this. It was Eric Chavez that signed a $66 million deal. That was back when Eric Chavez won the Gold Glove every year at third base, and he was a really good hitter. Like this is not a difficult deal to get to. And obviously Luis Severino is a good pitcher. We know this. I didn't trust him all last year. We kind of went at length about, we don't really trust the Mets. And then Severino just pitched great all year and definitely deserves this deal. But where was this a few years back when the A's started selling off really good pieces for pennies on the dollar? They had enough pieces that a Luis Severino could have been really impactful to that team. And now I think they're starting up a little bit, maybe a little bit shy, but I also want to see this from these types of teams, right? Severino could kickstart a good season that could then kickstart a good trade deadline that could kickstart a playoff, race, right? So this is a good step in the right direction, but they've left their ballpark, they've left their city. Like there's so much bad about this franchise that them finally doing a good move doesn't overlap all of the bad. It still feels slimy. It's like, why didn't you do this before when your team was in Oakland? What are you, because you move cities, you're not even paying for your own ballpark. Oh, now we can afford players. Okay. Like, that's just very slimy. And that's the only thing. It's a great baseball move. Luis Severino's a good pitcher. Get Brent Rooker some help there, but
well, I'll tell you why. It's because they were going to get in trouble with the Players Association if they didn't spend more money.
Yeah.
So they had to start spending some more money, and that's why. But I do like this move, and we'll talk more about the A's in totality here in a little bit with another move they made, which I really liked as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this has all of the makings to be a real solid, solid start to an offseason in which if the A's are serious about spending more money and making some more moves, that AL West kind of looks, I wouldn't say open, but like there's more of a room for them to be competitive-ish in that. I think they still have to make some major moves, but like could they push to be close to a 500 team with some of the moves they've made if they make a couple more? think so.
Yeah, I think so too. I think
So.
they're going to be in the thick of it.
Yeah.
I think both the A's and the Angels are signaling that the Houston looks to be on the decline. Texas had a bad year last year. I think we both feel like Texas will rebound to some extent. This could be a five team race next year
Yeah.
for the AL West, and Oakland feels like they can get in there.
Still not Oakland.
I'm gonna keep calling them Oakland for
I
like
know.
5 years, man. It's
I
gonna be
know.
bad. They should be there. Come on. Okay.
All right. So let's jump to talking about Shane Bieber, who signed
Yeah.
a 2-year, $26 million deal to return to the Cleveland Guardians organization. It's basically a 1-year deal with an option for the second year, I think, with a $4 million buyout. So it's really $10 million for the first year, which he's probably going to return somewhere around May ish, I believe, is around the time.
It's like May or June. Yeah.
Yeah. With a $4 million buyout and then a player option for $16 million for 2026.
I mean, this is a slam dunk. And the report that day was he turned down more money, more years to stay in Cleveland. He wants to finish his rehab with the same group that he started it with. I think that's a great call. He pitched really well last year before he blew his arm out, and I think if he believes that Cleveland is the best situation for him to continue to rehab, then that's perfectly fine and it's his prerogative. It bites to me that he's making more money or less money than Matt Boyd, and I'm sure it bites to some Cleveland fans too, because they're like, well, you could do this for Bieber, whose arm fell off. Like, you couldn't do that for Boyd, but it's good that he's back. Cleveland definitely needs more pitching, I think, still, because they're them behind like Tristan McKenzie on that rotation. It's very light, and they've done a pretty bad job of retaining good pitchers over there. Those guys kind of get good and leave from Cleveland. So Bieber staying is good. It's good news for Cleveland, but I guess we talked about the Andres Jimenez deal, but Cleveland's kind of they won the division last year, but it just doesn't feel like they're doing anything to retain the strength that they had last year. They've traded away Jimenez. They just returned Bieber. They're not getting any better. I'm concerned. I'm concerned for the Cleveland fans and the Cleveland team, because Jose Ramirez is only going to be the best third baseman in baseball for so long before you've started to waste him a little bit. So
yeah, I mean, Cleveland, this is kind of what they do. I mean, they are one of the better pitching development teams in baseball.
Yeah.
So I think that even with the year McKenzie had and the kind of the downtick Gavin Williams had, like, I trust them to return those pitching guys back to the level of what they should be. And they always just seem to find enough offense to be good enough. So, I mean, there's been rumors about Josh Naylor and Lane Thomas being traded and da-da-da-da-da. So I think there's enough offseason left for them to do something interesting, but obviously they're not going to go out and spend big on a player. It's going to be some more under the radar type names, but I think getting Bieber back, it's going to be big because he's a leader for that team. He really is. So
it's funny if you look at that Luis Severino deal to Oakland. Luis Severino would really be nice for this Cleveland team. Somebody to anchor that rotation at 2 or 3. That'd be nice.
There's been some, not like rumblings, but there's been some thought about potentially a Sean Manaea deal.
That fits. Cleveland. That's a pretty good fit. And you think Cleveland, after picking 1 in the draft, they're going to feel pretty confident in their pick, and I think they could probably overslot and sacrifice the second round pick for a qualifying offer deal. So that tracks for me.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump over to talking about Clay Holmes signing a 3-year, $38 million deal with the New York Mets. The caveat here is to be a starting pitcher.
That's weird. It's the third time it's done this, and I think we did mention this a little bit in the Juan Soto podcast that you guys can find on YouTube and Twitter in the broadcasts. But the Clay Holmes thing it's a very interesting experiment. It's following in the footsteps of the Jordan Hicks and the Reynaldo Lopez experiments. The one caveat is that, Hicks kind of fell apart halfway through the year last year, whereas Lopez, who was a starter before, endured the full workload despite some injuries. But neither one of those guys got to a full season. If you're the Mets, and if you're a Mets fan who you're riding high after Juan Soto, but Clay Holmes isn't a guy I'm relying on. He's definitely an intriguing option. Throws sinkers, right? He'll get ground balls. He could theoretically, go multiple innings anyway as a reliever. I just, it's just trying to extract the same value the Braves got out of Reynaldo Lopez, and I just don't know if the experience that Lopez had as a starter matters more than the skill set that Lopez has, because Lopez, like, his stuff ticked up in the bullpen and then he brought it over to the rotation and the stuff stayed good. I think that will happen for Clay Holmes, but I think the endurance Lopez already had is more important than the stuff, because these guys all have great stuff. This is kind of, these are great pitchers in their own right, each one, but Hicks only made it like 90 innings before he kind of needed to go back to the bullpen.
Yeah, I think Clay Holmes definitely has the secondary stuff to make this work as a starting pitcher. Like I think the overall the way the stuff will uptick, and it's kind of weird because we hear all the time you go to the bullpen and your stuff uptakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's when you kind of take it down to a pitch or two. Where I think Clay Holmes has enough arsenal to where he goes out as a starter. He's not limited to throwing more of like the sinker to sweeper most of the time like he does as a bullpen arm. You kind of open up your repertoire a little bit. And like if there's one guy who like a GM that I kind of trust with like, hey, signing this guy, finding a pitcher, it's David Stearns. Like
Yeah.
he did it so well in Milwaukee. Now I think the longevity part of it, like, will he be a guy who goes 170, 180 innings for you? I don't think so. Like if you get him to 120 innings, 130 this next year, I think that's kind of where they're going to be want to be at anyways. Um, and they'll play smart with him. I think this deal could actually relatively work out in a pretty good
Mm-hmm.
situation, because at the end of the day, like even if he kind of scuffles as a starter, you still got a guy who's been a really solid reliever that you can put into the back end of a bullpen. Now, he's not the most shutdown guy ever, but a lot of the stats, I mean, he's not been terrible.
Right.
Like, yeah, as much as people say, like, oh, Clay Holmes has been so bad, I feel part of that's because of the New York media.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if he played in Cleveland or if he played in Cincinnati, like, everybody would be like, oh, this is a really good reliever.
Yeah.
Because you look at the stuff and you're like, yeah, I can see it. So
Yeah.
I don't hate it. I think it's definitely a question mark. But like, if there's a guy who has a proven track record with question mark pitchers and making them work, it's
Mm-hmm.
David Stearns. So I just kind of trust him to figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Danny Jansen going to the Tampa Bay Rays on a 1-year deal with $8.5 million that also has a club option for 2026. Tampa Bay kind of needed a catcher. They didn't really have anyone there long term. I think they were playing like Alex Jackson, and I don't even remember who else. It was their situation was really bad. There, Jansen was a highly sought after guy. He played in the AL East for a long time, or his whole career basically, with Toronto, and then got traded to Boston. A career 100 WRC plus guy, really good defender. This year really struggled at the plate, but the past 3 years had been a 105, 141, and a 115 WRC plus. So I really like Jansen as a player going to Tampa Bay. Playing in a minor league ballpark too. It's funny enough to say it, but playing or a spring training facility. Sorry, this one. I think that'll help uptick the numbers even a little bit more. And this is a typical Rays move because they could even flip him at the deadline, and I don't think anyone would be shocked.
Yeah, he took less years to go to Tampa Bay. I think he ends up getting more the same amount of money, but other teams were wanting him for multiple years. But he wanted to be the starting catcher for a team, and that was the big selling point that Tampa Bay just desperately needed a starter. This catching situation was really bad for all Tampa Bay's good work that they've done with constructing a lineup, despite not spending, despite consistently trading away their good players. They had not been able to solve catcher, and I think they were going to run out Ben Rortvedt as the starter next year, which was just that's not going to go over very well, I think. But Danny Jansen fits into this as he's a starter. He should play 120, 130 games. He's looking to rebound his free agency value to look more like the guy, I think, before this past year. as if he looks like that guy, an above average hitter with solid defense at catcher. He's like a 3 to 4 win player. He's, he isn't going to be in a timeshare with other catchers like he was in Toronto. I think that was kind of part of it too, is he didn't want to be in another timeshare. He wanted to kind of have a starting job, and he's got one now. So it's kind of put up time for Danny Jansen, but he's betting on himself, I think. And that's always good to see. I think the one thing is that this is a mutual option, I believe, between them and him in the race. So if it goes well, but not well enough, then both they might accept the mutual option. I typically feel like that's a player option, kind of
Yeah,
where the team would almost always opt in. Why wouldn't they? But the players kind of decides whether or not they want to opt out. So if it works for Danny Jansen and he hits well and he plays well, he's opting out. He's not going to take that deal, but um, it's effectively a 1 year deal, and I would treat it as such.
basically. All right, so let's jump to a couple of Baltimore Orioles moves. First, they signed Tyler O'Neill to a 3-year, $49.5 million contract. And then the next day, they signed Gary Sanchez to a 1-year, $8.5 million deal to be the backup catcher there. O'Neill is a power hitting outfielder. So it's interesting that, the Baltimore really needed a right-handed bat. They're most likely losing Anthony Santander. A lot of their other outfielders are left-handed. So he kind of fits there, but he's an extreme platoon guy. Like his versus lefties, I think he has like a 140 WRC plus, and versus righties, it's like 70 or something like that especially last year with Boston. So it's gonna be interesting to see how this works out. It's kind of a little bit more money for a platoon bat than I was thinking, but kind of like what we talked about, the market is kind of the market a little bit right now. But other than that, Baltimore is also bringing in the left field wall a little bit more,
Yep.
so it makes it a little bit more desirable for those right-handed hitters. And then Gary's just going to be the backup catcher to Adley Rutschman there, give him a little bit more offense than James McCann was giving them.
Yeah, the weird part with both of these deals, we talked a little bit about the Tyler O'Neill deal. I think that fell in one of I think it was the Garrett Crochet. It was kind of a near, it was near Willie Adames. That's when it was.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit more about Tyler O'Neill. The issue, as per that's always going to be, seems to be the injuries, right? Is Tyler O'Neill's body going to stay healthy for a full season? Can you count on him through it all? The advantage, of course, for Baltimore is that they've still got Heston Kjerstad and a few other hitters who can come up upon Tyler O'Neill injury. That seems fine. The deal itself is it's a little more than I thought he would get, but Baltimore's kind of an ideal spot, especially as they bring that wall in. That may really help right-handed hitting, and especially when it comes to Tyler O'Neill, who's got that big pull power. Took advantage of it in Boston, hit 30 home runs. I think he could very well do that again in Baltimore. So important, right? An important deal for a contender. The Gary Sanchez thing is really curious, though, because he's going to be tied with Danny Jansen with making the single highest salary for a catcher of any of the free agent catchers that signed. Higashioka made 6, Jansen 8.5, Gary's making 8.5. I don't know where that came from, right? He doesn't field well. He's mostly an offensive backup and kind of your, another righty power bat for the Baltimore Orioles, but he's not good he's not a good righty power bat. He's just kind of okay, and he can kind of okay play catcher. I was thinking Gary would make like 5, 4.5, something like that on this market, right? Nope, he's the top paid catcher in the free agency this year. That's just very weird to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit shocking. I also wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of like platoon at DH with Ryan O'Hearn.
Maybe
most of the other times with like kind of minimal catcher starts, if that makes any sense. Like they might keep Gary, and obviously you have Adley Rutschman, so 90% of the time you're most likely starting Adley Rutschman as your catcher. There'll be some days where he probably plays a different position, but I just think that it's more of like, hey, we think the bat has a little bit more there. And he has always crushed in Baltimore in the first place. So I think they're just kind of doing the, hey, come in and give us close to 100 WRC plus, if not higher than that, which is kind of what Gary does anyways as a backup catcher, because they've had James McCann, who's kind of been a real negative offensively for them. And I just think they're looking for a little bit more of that offensive firepower there. on those off days, and then do a platoon with like Ryan O'Hearn. Because let me look at what's Gary's splits against lefties this last year.
Yeah, that might be the way
Was
his platoon. But
he actually wasn't. He was only 98 WRC plus versus
yeah.
lefties last year, so not great. But that's probably somewhere around the idea. They probably see a change they
Sure.
can make. But all right, let's talk about a couple Dodger moves that we had happen now. First being Michael Conforto signing a 1-year, $17 million deal, and then Blake Trinan the next day signing a 2-year, $22 million deal to return with the Dodgers as well.
Yeah, Trinan kind of makes that Aroldis Chapman move we talked about earlier look perfectly reasonable, right? I mean, he's more money, but this is the match made in heaven. These guys he's been playing with Los Angeles forever. He's played his entire career in California. Like, this is a guy that did not want to leave. LA made sure to bring him back. You've expressed, exactly the same stuff, right? He's a great pitcher. He's the guy you want to have on your team, in your bullpen. It's a dog, throws the sinker, throws the really good slider. He can get you out a bunch of different ways. Trinan's just back in LA just makes so much sense. He just probably needs to finish his career out there. And then I don't know if we talked about Conforto in one of our other episodes,
it was like right before Soto happened. Like
okay.
It was like 20 minutes before Soto.
Oh, that's right.
Really.
Because the Dodgers were reacted. So
yeah.
Conforto's really interesting. He was I would say maybe the most interesting of the platoon bats on the market, because you have Jock Peterson, who had a really good deal, really good performance last year, but Conforto was not great in Oracle and really, really good away from Oracle. Splits were like 200 points of OPS apart. He had like an 850 OPS outside of Oracle. And the big thing with him getting that deal in San Francisco was it was so limited because we didn't know how healthy Michael Conforto was going to be going into that free agency period. That ended up lasting a really long time. He ended up taking the shorter term deal in San Francisco. He's kind of proven that the results from the Mets time were not unjust, but they were suppressed because he played in San Francisco. So I feel really pretty confident the Dodgers kind of hit another home run again, of course. I think they paid up, overpaid a little bit to go and get this deal done, right? Because this Conforto making more than Tyler O'Neill next year is a little bit questionable. O'Neill had the better season, but the Dodgers are trusting that Conforto is going to perform better. And I think that's pretty reasonable given the struggles in Oracle Park, which is notorious against lefties. Dodger Stadium is going to be fine, I think, for him.
Yeah, just to highlight your point there, Conforto 632 OPS and an 83 WRC plus at home, and 852 OPS and a 133 WRC plus on the road. The one thing that I don't agree with what you said is him being a platoon bat. If you look at it, he's actually a reverse splits guy. So in 2024, he had a 145 WRC plus against lefties and only a 102 against righties. He's actually really good against lefties. And what you mentioned with him taking the longer offseason going to San Francisco, he's also coming off shoulder surgery.
Yep.
Which we've always seen guys take 2 to 3 years to really get back to that self. I love this deal. Like, I've always been a Michael Conforto fan. David can attest to that. I've always been super high on Conforto from his Mets days. He is always a guy that I kind of wanted the Dodgers to take a shot on, especially like when he was coming off the shoulder surgery. Yep. I really wanted him there. This feels a lot like the Teoscar Hernandez deal from last year. Hey, you have severe home and road splits. Take a 1-year deal with us. Have a chance to win. We'll pay you more on a 1-year deal than you'll get on multi-year deals. And that's why the discrepancy between Tyler O'Neill and Michael Conforto's contracts is because it's the 1-year deal. It's the same thing that they did with Teoscar. Teoscar took 23 from the Dodgers on a 1-year last year, where other teams were offering him like 18 to 20 on a 2 to 3 year deal. So I love this deal from Conforto. It's going to be interesting to see what happens because we still haven't got the resolution with Teoscar Hernandez. Everyone still thinks he's coming back, but like at this point, wouldn't you think it would just get done if it was that easy? Yeah. And then it's going to be interesting to see because he's not really a platoon bat, but yet it's almost in a platoon role.
Right.
Because it's like they have Andy Pajes and right. They've already said Edman's going to be playing center. Like is this just like, hey, if Teoscar doesn't come back, then Conforto is the full-time left fielder? That part's interesting.
Yeah.
Trinan coming back, I think, like you said, I think he's great. He's expressed that he wants to finish his career in Los Angeles. He said multiple times, like, what they do for a player, what they've done for me. I think it just makes too much sense. $11 million. It's probably underpaying him, really, what he's really, really worth. I mean, but you're talking about a guy who won for the past 3 years he's pitched. He's had under a 2 ERA.
Yeah.
Each year. Like, he's a shutdown reliever. So I think it makes a lot of sense on both of those deals.
For sure.
So let's jump to talking about the Philadelphia Phillies signing closing pitcher Jordan Romano to a 1-year, $8.5 million deal. David, I know this is a guy you were really interested in the Cubs getting, but he goes to the Phillies on a 1-year, $8.5 million contract.
Yeah, Phillies jumped the market for Jordan Romano, and this is slightly more than he was going to make in arbitration. I think he was set to make either 8 or 7.5, something like that. Toronto non-tendered him based on that, and the biggest, I think, question mark is the health, because he missed some time late in the season last year. But I mean, for a team that just lost Carlos Estevez and Jeff Hoffman out of the back end of their bullpen in the Philadelphia Phillies, being able to just plug and play Jordan Romano, a guy who's coming off a year where he just had a really abysmal ERA, but struggled with those injuries. And before that, he's kind of a lockdown closer. Like, he's lockdown level for the the Toronto Blue Jays, like 36 saves 2 consecutive years, low 2 ERA every year. Like, this is a guy with really good stuff. Throws 97 miles an hour, just automatically someone you want in the back end of your bullpen. It's a no-brainer. We talked about this when he was non-tendered. Like, why is this guy on the market? That Toronto had control. They should have just kept him, right? And then, or traded him beforehand and gotten something back for him. Don't non-tender this guy. Like that seems ridiculous to me, but Phillies take advantage. That's what good teams do. Slot him right in the closer role. He'll start for him there from day one. I have no qualms about last year. I think it was an aberration. I'd be very comfortable if I were a Phillies fan that they were jumped on this so quickly and got Romano in the fold.
Yeah, I think it's a very savvy move from Dave Dombrowski to get Romano in there early, fix what they think needs to get fixed with them, and I still don't think it rules them out from doing any other back end of the bullpen. Kind of if they re-sign Jeff Hoffman, Estevez, maybe even if they spend up for a Tanner Scott, you can't have too many dominant bullpen arms back in the rotation. So
that's right.
All right, let's talk about Alex Cobb. Signed a 1-year, $15 million deal with the Detroit Tigers. We've seen the Tigers have success on these 1-year type pitchers. It's funny enough, Cobb was actually speaking this morning and said that he had planned on retiring after the 2024 season, or after the 2024 season, until he heard that the Tigers were interested and were willing to give him $15 million. Then he was like, I was surprised with that much money.
Man, Alex Cobb's had a nice little career. Like, he's been around forever. And this is a guy that, got hurt and came back with San Francisco a couple years ago and came back throwing 95 all of a sudden, when he had been like a 91, 92 guy his whole career. And then with San Francisco, he jumped to 95 out of nowhere, and he's maintained it. He's maintained it every year. He was pretty good for Cleveland down the stretch last year. Like, in the postseason, he pitched 2 games. Like, he wasn't good in the postseason, but they needed him. Like, Alex Cobb is the kind of guy that he's made a really long career out of being just a good pitcher, not a great pitcher, right? But he's been good enough. He's been flexible. He's been able to, pitch for a lot of different teams. This is a solid deal for a Detroit team that's, like we said last year, just in desperate need of starting pitching. Through top to bottom, they're he probably slots in 3-4 maybe in this rotation, but Detroit needs to keep adding to their pitching staff, because right now they've got Jackson Jobe penciled in there. I don't think they're going to start Jackson Jobe off with the team next year. I mean, they might. They started off Colt Keith last year, but Alex Cobb's a nice veteran to have, especially if you are going to put a lot of time into Jackson Jobe and maybe Casey Mize next season in the starting rotation. They get to learn from a guy like Alex Cobb, who's been around for a decade plus. Like that's the kind of guy you want mentoring your young starting pitchers and also mentoring your ace, who's also a lefty in Tariq Skubal. So, this is Cobb. It feels like just a perfect move for that clubhouse. 15 million. That seems to be about the rate of those middle to late rotation pitchers at this point. Like,
Yeah. I think spending $15 million on Cobb is fine, but like if I was running it, would I rather have spent $15 million on Cobb or spent like up to 20 to 21 and went and just re-signed like Jack Flaherty, who we knew had a really good time there already? I know it's not a 1-year deal, but like at the end of the day, he had a really good thing there. You're trying to build. I just think I would have rather spent a little bit more for a guy who doesn't have as much injury track history as Cobb. But anyways,
I probably would just sell the Tigers to sign Flaherty too. It would actually be a really solid fit.
Yeah. I mean, I just said
Still.
if you only had the one pitcher move
Right.
you were going to do, I would rather have done that, which I don't know they do. It's just my thinking is like I don't know if they're going to overcrowd pitching and signing another pitcher.
The Tigers need it. They
with
need
a bunch
they need
of their young guys.
They need so much depth. I think that team could really use the extra arms.
Probably.
So.
Okay, so let's talk about Yimi Garcia signing a 2-year, $15 million contract with Toronto. He had spent 2.5 years there in Toronto before, 2022, 2023, and half of 2024 before being traded to Seattle. Had been really solid there. He's turned himself into a nice little leverage reliever in his, early to mid 30s here. So solid deal for Toronto, $7 million or $7.5 million for a middle reliever kind of seems middle-ish to back end, kind of seems about what the going rate is here.
Yeah. No, the money is perfectly fine. I mean, Yimi Garcia was really quite good with the Blue Jays, and he kind of was a victim of them selling off this last offseason. It appears there's no hard feelings. I don't have a whole lot for this one. Toronto needs more relievers, though, because they just let Jordan Romano walk for about this amount of money.
Yeah.
So, again, that's where I'm like, why are we letting Jordan Romano walk? I just don't. That one doesn't make any sense. Toronto has been really desperate for signing team players, especially since Ohtani kind of publicly declined them. Yeah. They've been involved in a lot of free agents and have gotten like none of them lately. This feels like a very desperate franchise. At least it seems like Yimi liked it there and wanted to go back. That seems pretty obvious, but 7.5, that seems like the going rate for that middle reliever. So, I expect we'll see a bunch more middle relievers at $7 million the rest of the way. If you want a middle reliever, you're probably gonna have to pay at least $7 million.
Right around there. Yep. All right. So let's talk about Thairo Estrada. Signed a 1-year, $3.25 million contract with the Colorado Rockies. That has a mutual option for 2026 as well. Estrada is coming, staying in the NOS, coming from the San Francisco Giants. Before 2024, had 3 seasons above 100 WRC plus. Had turned himself into a nice little player there. This year really, really struggled to a 64 WRC plus. Still pretty good defensively at second base there. But just this seems like a kind of buy low on a guy, and then if it kind of works out, maybe you'll be able to flip him at the deadline. It gives them a little bit of backup if Adel Amador isn't ready to take the starting second base role to begin the season. And they had already let Brendan Rodgers walk in the non-tender deal. So Thairo Estrada going to the Rockies.
I love this deal, and it's so weird because I love a move the Rockies made. What is going on? It's odd. Thairo Estrada had a sprained wrist all season that he was dealing with. It was sapping his power, and then he was hitting an oracle. I think it affected his plate discipline because there was a series against the Cubs. I went to one of the games in Wrigley Field. He swung at every pitch. He was in his own head trying to get more out of it. And I think a reset to a place that's so good for offense. Thairo Estrada is about to have a great year. Just a great year. I feel very, very confident about that. And, what a great move for the Rockies. Just a depth guy, right? He can play second base. He can play some shortstop. He can probably play some first base. He'll just moonlight around the infield for him. Like you said, he'll be in there in front of Amador. Great move. There's no downside for this. The contract's so cheap too. Like there's so many teams looking for bench bats. he gets to start probably in Colorado, which is even better. He'll probably be somebody looking for it feels like Jurickson Profar from a few years ago when he went to the Padres, right? Revive the career a little bit after a down year, and then he just is going to explode. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about, I think this is probably one of the more shocking moves that we had happen just because it kind of came out of nowhere, and that is Jake Burger getting traded to the Texas Rangers for a package of prospects, Max Acosta, Estri Vargas, and Brian Mendoza. I'm not going to act to know anything about those prospects, but what I can tell you is I was a little shocked that Miami first traded Jake Burger. And then the fact that he was traded to Texas already, who has Josh Jung at third base. You have Nate Lowe at first base. I know there's been some rumblings, Nate Lowe potentially could get traded, but like he's been really good as well. I don't think Jake Burger is better than him. And it's just kind of a weird fit. Like Burger would almost have to slot into a full-time DH role there, which probably isn't terrible for him. Like he's not great of a defender, but he's a big-time power bat. But just like, do you want to lock him into a DH spot, which is a little interesting. But I think that makes this Texas offense incredibly deep.
Yeah, this is ridiculous from Miami. What are they doing? The Marlins have absolutely nothing going offensively. This is a brutal team. Jake Burger had 3 years of control left and was reportedly an extremely good clubhouse presence in Miami.
4 years.
No, he's 4 years of control. That's right, because the first year is
he's still RL.
Kind of Jake Burger is, by all accounts, a really good human being in your locker room. If you are the Miami Marlins with zero going for you in terms of baseball presence, having a good human being in the locker room who can also mash home runs, he's a great option. To let that guy play. You don't need these 3 minor prospects. And now I'm sitting here going, okay, well, the Marlins need to just, they've got these other talented players like Sandy Alcantara, Jesus Luzardo. What, you're taking like prospect lottery flyers for these guys? Like, I just don't understand. Like, even still, like you could get a better set of prospects for Jake Burger. I feel like this felt like a very unneeded dumping of a guy who's very clearly a good locker room presence, a good player. Like he's not, I don't think he's much more than about what Patrick Wisdom has been for the Cubs the last couple of years. Like a righty masher that just slams home runs, doesn't play any very good defense, but he can moonlight third base. That's kind of all he is, but that's a good player to have on your team. You want that guy on your team. Like those guys are really helpful and they're fun to watch, especially when they go nuts for a month and hit 15 home runs, which is what Jake Burger did last year. What Miami? Come on, man. Like, oh my goodness. Terrible move. Texas, great for them. Heck yeah. Hope Jake Burger goes and wins a division and plays in the playoffs.
It's a super head scratching deal. Peter Bendix is coming in trying to bring his own feel to things. Burger was a guy that Kim Ng traded for right before she got fired, basically. And he didn't fit the Peter Bendix mold, the Rays-ish mold, the Yankees-ish mold, which is what they're trying to fuse together over there. If you don't really understand, the ownership is like Yankees style, but then Bendix is Rays style, and they're trying to fusion the two together like the Dodgers did with the Rays when they hired Andrew Friedman. But the Marlins also don't spend on that level. It's really head-scratching. I don't get it either. But real quick before we move off of this one, I don't know why this isn't talked about enough either. Jake Burger is on his own Chris Davis streak. And if you don't know, I'm talking about the Oakland A's version of Chris Davis. He's hit 250 the last 3 years in a row. Exactly 250.
Let's go.
Streak. So Jake, I'm going to need you to continue hitting 250 because that's just awesome.
He wasn't qualified in 2022, unfortunately. I think he needs 2 more years for the Chris Davis streak. But
listen,
that's
I don't
so cool.
care about qualifications. He played 50 games. Okay, it's enough games for me. Okay, so let's talk about the next one.
One more connection is that Skip Schumacher just got hired to the Rangers front office. Yes. And I think this was you must go get this man by Skip Schumacher, which is awesome. And I feel like it's great for the Rangers. They got young third baseman. Like
he probably had the insight that Peter Bendix was willing to move off of Burger and that like the price wasn't going to be too much. He probably had this. He
Mhm.
probably knew. Um,
Yep.
so if you watched our Max Fried episode where we also talked about Andres Jimenez trade, we talked about how good of a fit Spencer Horwitz was going to be in Cleveland. We talked about it for like 5 minutes. Hey, such a good fit there. Man, by the time that night ended, Spencer Horwitz was traded from Cleveland to Pittsburgh in another move there. Matt and I just we couldn't believe ourselves. Um, so if you want to know what we think about Spencer Horowitz, just listen to that episode
Mhm.
because it's in there. I think we both really like him. I think he's a really good player. Now this deal to Pittsburgh is really interesting though because
Yep.
I feel like Cleveland did pretty well in this deal getting Luis Ortiz.
Yeah.
Um, I really do like what Luis Ortiz can do. He pitched really well in the Pirates, who have proven that they can develop some pitching too. But now he's going to Cleveland, where that's just going to exasperate even more. I don't know much about Josh Hartle or Michael Kennedy, but I know a couple Pirates people, and they really hated giving up Hartle,
Yeah.
who was a recent draftee. Um, but overall, I think this is a pretty good deal for both sides. Pittsburgh has been looking for someone to play first base for them. They've been dealing with like Rowdy Tellez for the last year. You get Horowitz, who's 27, kind of fits right in there, cheap for like the next 6 years. I think you have him, and then Ortiz goes over to Cleveland, and they kind of needed some pitching anyways.
Yeah, Ortiz feels like a guy that might. I don't want to do this exact comparison because he's not the same level. But Garrett Cole really struggled to get strikeouts with Pittsburgh. Just the way Pittsburgh, develops their pitching, it works, but it comes at the cost of whiffs. The guys like Jerry Jones and Paul Skeens are kind of immune to this because their stuff is so good. Luis Ortiz is the kind of guy that I think if you put him in, like, he's got the ingredients to be a really good pitcher, but if you put him in with a team that can actually cook like Cleveland, you'll end up with a good pitcher. So similarly to with Garrett Cole, once he left Pittsburgh, he just ascended to superstar level with Houston, right? That's not exactly the same, but I do feel like you will end up with a good pitcher in Cleveland with Luis Ortiz, which, hey, I did say earlier, they need to get hit pitching. Luis Ortiz definitely adds to that pitching depth. Um, I think Horowitz was a little bit of a redundant player unless you were playing him at second base for Cleveland, which I'm guessing you guys thought they were just going to say, screw the defense. We'll play Horowitz at second in the last pod, but that would have worked. I thought that would, I was with you guys. I was like, oh, that seems like a really good idea. Why is Toronto trading Horowitz? And then it's like, why is Cleveland trading Horowitz? What is going on? This guy just keeps getting moved around, but he can hit. Like, we know he can hit. He can hit at the major league level. We've seen it. So yeah, I hope he's not a thorn in the Cubs' side, because I mean, this seems like a really good move for them, and it's kind of getting. It's the kind of thing that Pittsburgh always does. They just cycle through. If the pitcher isn't quite as good as they want, they just move on. Roasny Contreras got removed, and they've been kind of doing this. There was already rumblings they're going to move Mitch Keller. Like, Pittsburgh just does this. I think they just give up on their pitchers a little too quickly.
Yeah, I don't think at the end of the day they end up moving Mitch Keller. Like, it would take an absolute haul, but like, I think this is a great fit for Horowitz, and then Ortiz going over Cleveland. I think it fits really well as well. So after that we had a kind of a few days of not much happening. Rule 5 winter meetings end. Then we got to Friday. That's when we had the Kyle Tucker trade. We talked about that already. And then the weekends are usually relatively slow as it is, except Sunday morning.
Well, you missed one.
Well, which one?
Carson Kelly.
Oh, well, I was going to get to that. That's what I was getting to. It was actually Friday.
It was Friday.
I have it mixed up here. Friday, I have Carson Kelly on my thing, though. Carson Kelly signed a 2-year, $11.5 million contract with the Chicago Cubs. That's why David wants to talk about him, including it does have a mutual option for 2027. But this fits really well, right? Like, they have Miguel Amaya, who like you hope is the breakout there. You needed somebody else to kind of be that swing type backup catcher. Matt Thaiss, who they traded for non-tender deadline, he's not that guy. Yes. He's a perfect third catcher, but Kelly really fits kind of into that pseudo like 60-40-ish, if not 50-50-ish time thing. And if Amaya doesn't really break out the way you hope he does, then he could take a little bit more playing time.
Yeah, I mean, Miguel Amaya, started off the year just so poorly, and it coupled with Yan Gomes hitting the age plateau last season, where the Cubs were the worst catching team in baseball until the break, other than Martin Maldonado and the White Sox, by like miles. It was like the White Sox and then the Cubs, and then there was like 40% of WRC plus to the next team. Like it was horrendous. Miguel Amaya had made some changes though in the middle of the season, got changed up how his stance, lowered his hands a little bit, changed his kick to a toe tap, and he took off. He started playing really well. But you can't rely on that, right? Because I think that's just him adjusting to the league, and then the league is going to adjust back. But a guy like Carson Kelly's been around for a while and plays good defense, and I do believe that Miguel Amaya needs some work defensively as catcher. He's not abysmal. Otherwise, if they were willing to just deal with abysmal, they just would have put Moises Ballesteros there, the top prospect. But Carson Kelly's a good defender, and he's going to be making less than Higashioka. He's going to be making less than Jansen, Gary Sanchez. I mean, this is a Jed Hoyer win right here. I mean, you get it for 2 years, which, that worries me a little bit, but I'm a lot more confident in this than I was Tucker Barnhart, who swings like a wet noodle. Like, I feel like Carson Kelly's got a good approach. He's got some power. He's not a superstar catcher or anything, but he could definitely put together like an 80, 90 WRC plus season. And that's really all you're asking for from your catcher at this point, especially at the bottom of the lineup that's starting to look pretty good. So I'm happy with Carson Kelly. I think this is a great move. And yeah, I hope he's a good mentor for Miguel Amaya.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad deal at all. It seems to be about the going rate for backup catchers or what are these timeshare catchers per se.
Yeah.
All right. So then we have the one today, so we'll get to that one too. But the interesting deal that happened, it was Saturday morning, and it was that the two teams playing in small ballparks made a deal with each other. Yep. And that was the Tampa Bay Rays trading pitcher Jeffrey Springs to the Athletics for a package around Joe Boyle, who's kind of the main guy there, a couple prospects, and then a competitive balance A pick. So number 36 in the draft, which is another big get for there. Springs is recovering from Tommy John surgery, could have returned at the end of last year, but his team decided to hold him out just for health wise, have a full untouched off season. And so he should be ready opening day there. He's 32. I think he signed to a relatively club friendly contract for the next 2 years. Also has a club option for the 2027 season. Still a real solid pitcher, in his career, has a 3.39 ERA, a 3.64 FIP. And then the return, Joe Boyle is a guy who has insane stuff, like 102 fastball, his slider, sweeper, whatever you want to call it, is really, really good. But he really struggles with command. This screams like the next kind of Tyler Glasnow-ish guy that the Rays are really good with. Big, lengthy guy. He's 6'7", 240 as well. Like, same kind of height as Glasnow, same kind of stuff, struggles with command, but has insane physical stuff there. Yep. So I think it's a really good deal for both sides. We talked about the A's wanting to be more aggressive. Now you have Severino and Springs atop that rotation with a couple of their young guys who showed pretty well at the end of last year. And then we always say the joke, don't ever trade with the Rays because they just find a way to get the best out of it. Getting Joe Boyle, who I think could be really, really good in a few years, and then also another draft pick to help them recoup their farm even more. It's a typical Rays deal.
Yeah, this is a Rays trade, right? Straight up. It's the kind of trade you expect from the Rays. They're taking on, the competitive balance pick and a project like Joe Boyle and a couple of prospects. But the project, I mean, you've got a whole lot of outcomes for this. It's the Rays have such a wealth of starting pitching depth here that they can trade a Jeffrey Springs and feel pretty good about it. I mean, they didn't have Springs at all last year, but that's a group that's got, Shane McClanahan, Taj Bradley, Ryan Pepio, Zach Littell, Shane Boz, like Drew Rasmussen. I feel really good about all those guys. I would probably put all those guys over Springs in my, if I was picking one. So I'm okay with moving Springs, and then you get the draft pick, which is the Rays love them some draft picks. Yep. And, a project that could probably slot into the bullpen if you can't figure him out as a starter. My assumption is the Rays try to just shove Joe Boyle into a relief slot like immediately. and just
For
say,
now,
dude,
yeah,
throw hard, throw your sweeper. We're just going to try to change it up. Just, do your best to throw strikes, but it doesn't really matter in relief role because, we saw it with the Roldis Chapman. You could walk a ton of people. And as long as you're just getting whiffs with nasty stuff, it doesn't seem to matter all that much. So, it feels very Rays. It's kind of nice. And, you know, A's, I hope it works out for him. Obviously, I don't think there's any harm in moving on from Joe Boyle. He was really struggling with them, and hey, this is kind of how the Rays do it, right? They identify a struggling player and try to capitalize, and then grow that player, and then trade him later.
yeah.
So,
Well, and we've seen the Rays also. Like, I think Boyle going to the bullpen, it makes a ton of sense to begin with because we've seen them do it. I mean, Drew Rasmussen, Jeffrey Springs himself, Zach Littell. These are all guys who started in the pen until they got their because you can survive in the pen while still making adjustments, and then you can then go to be a starter at that point. So I wouldn't be any surprised to see Boyle spend a year in the pen, and then come 2026 season, they start looking at him as potentially being a rotation option, because then I bet they might look to move a different pitcher, whether it be Rasmussen or Littell or somewhere around there.
I wouldn't be surprised if they try to move McClanahan or Boz here at some point as well, especially if they show out in the first half, just because those guys are hitting arbitration, and that's what the Rays do.
I think McClanahan, because he's coming off Tommy John surgery, I think there's going to be a little bit of wariness around him. Obviously, he's an ace level pitcher. People should still want to get him, and they will. But I just don't think it would be the best interest for the Rays to trade them now. Boz, potentially.
Well, I'm saying before the like mid-season, right? Like the one thing the Rays love to do is move on from somebody if they have a good year, right? And if one of those guys is pitching well.
What I'm saying is I think even mid-year is too early to trade McClanahan. Like, I think that would be like a next off-season move. Like, let's see McClanahan get through a full year after the Tommy John. That's type of what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
Okay, so last little one we had happen, which was earlier, right before we wanted to record this. We don't know much about it, but the Baltimore Orioles signed Tomoyuki Sugano to a 1-year, $13 million deal. Sugano is a 35-year-old pitcher from Japan, is not a part of the bonus or international free agent. He's just a straight free agent. There is no what's the word I'm looking for? No, to the other
bonus
teams in Japan. Yeah, there's no.
I know what word you're going for. I
can't think of it.
You lost me too. It's posting
fee. Yes, thank you. There's no posting fee going to his team there. He's been one of the best. This is per Jeff Pass, and he had been one of the best pitchers in Japanese baseball this year. He's posted 167 a 1.67 ERA, walking 16 with 111 strikeouts over 156 and 2/3 innings. So obviously not a ton of strikeouts for the innings, but he also doesn't walk anybody as well. A 1-year deal also for a 35-year-old pitcher at $13 million. It's not bad. That's actually under the market value of what we've been talking about. He's probably slots in as a back of the rotation starter, because you think a 167 in Japan probably equates to close to a mid threes, if not low fours ERA in America, especially with his not elite strikeout stuff. So for a team that's already going to lose Corbin Burns, there's question marks around Kyle Bradish is going to be out. They don't have John Means. It's like Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, and a bunch of other guys. It's not a terrible deal.
No, this is a fine deal. I mean, 167 ERA in Japan is fantastic. We've seen a lot of Japanese guys come over and have some success, especially the older vets, the wily vets that have, they've kind of understood who they are. I think that's been a little bit more successful of late than the kind of the really young guys. I'm thinking of Fujinami, who really struggled but had nasty stuff. I think Shota Imanaga is, I think, a little more of a strikeout guy than Sugano, and he's significantly younger. But Sugano can have a couple good years. I think we've seen some of the relievers come over and struggle a little more. but I feel pretty good that Sugano will be able to get outs for Baltimore, and they need somebody at the back end of the rotation. This is a little bit cheaper than a Matt Boyd or an Alex Cobb,
Yeah.
guys in that tier. And I think he can probably get to that point. Now, it's, you look at how few strikeouts he had in 156 innings in Japan, but he suppressed so many runs. I think his stuff's good enough, but he may be one of those. He may almost be more of a Kyle Hendricks level where he's not striking out many, he's not walking many, getting a lot of, sometimes some games he'll get hammered, some games he won't. He's an older pitcher. He's wily. I feel quite comfortable that he'll be able to get outs at a major league level. But are those outs? Are those outs? 3 innings at a time or 6 innings at a time? I'm not sure yet. So.
Yeah, it's going to just have to be a wait and see type thing there with Sugano.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty much everything that we have to hit on to kind of wrap up the winter meetings week and kind of the week before that technically. Looking forward, we don't have many emergency podcast worthy things left. I mean, I think we got like Bregman, you got Corbin Burns, you got Roki Sasaki, but that the international market is shut down now until January 15th.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't even sign. The earliest he could sign at this point is January 15th because that market closed December 15th for the offseason portion of that. And then you got like the other upcoming deals or whenever Teoscar Hernandez signs in Santander. There's been a lot of smoke around Tanner Scott. Just some of these deals, obviously there could be trades that pop out of nowhere. There seems to be some bigger stuff like the Cubs and Marlins are talking about a Jesus Luzardo trade. The Cubs and the Yankees are talking about a Cody Bellinger trade. If either one of them can ever figure out, hey, if you take on more money, my prospect return is less, or if I take on more money, my prospect return is better, and they just decide like, hey, we're talking about $10 million here, which is nothing. I paid Matt Boyd 14.
I think that the holdup here, especially from the reports we're seeing, is the Yankees got jealous that they lost Kyle Tucker. That's kind of the point here. Is
what it is that the Yankees, they don't want to pay $10 million for extra for Cody Bellinger, and it's like, who cares? And the Cubs are like, we don't want to pay you $10 million to take him, and it's like, who cares?
From our understanding, the deal was agreed upon before the Kyle Tucker thing, and since the Kyle Tucker thing, it has not been agreed upon. So
because they're fighting over money.
Because they're fighting over money, and I think the money fight only happened after Kyle Tucker, which tells me there's some hard feelings. But at the end of the day, I also think the Cody Bellinger thing is a little overblown. I do hope the Cubs hang on to him somehow, but we'll see. It seems inevitable. It has seemed inevitable since he opted in. But I sure would like to have Cody Bellinger and Kyle Tucker in the same lineup. That sure would be fun.
I just feel like at this point, it's kind of hard to bring back the guy who's been in trade rumors consistently, bring him back to the team.
Well, Nico Horner was in trade rumors too, but yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah. Rose, how did I find y'all looking up Crochet?
We've talked about him before
on Garrett Crochet, and then I guess I technically put him in the comment stuff here.
Nice.
Even though we said to talk about the other ones, so that's a little bit my bad, but hope you enjoyed or hope you enjoy watching us, and we'll follow and like us. Go look at our Twitter, go look at our TikTok. Just let us know. Actually, I didn't do the Crochet deal, so that's them.
Yeah, that was me,
David and Matt. So if they had bad takes, let me know. I'm surprised I'm not shocked if they did. But anyways, thanks for finding us.
I loved the Crochet deal for the Red Sox, by the way. Loved it.
I liked it. I like it for both sides.
But yeah, I also, and then the summary was Braden Montgomery might be the best player that got traded there, and that's awesome. But we're going to be waiting a few years for that one to pan out.
Yeah. Okay, so I think just looking forward as far as podcasts is, we'll probably take the next 2 weeks off, and come back on the 6th just for Christmas and New Year's.
Yep.
Obviously, if something big happens with emergency podcasts, we will do something for that, and get those deals in. So, if you're trying to look on the normal stuff, look for the 6th, and then if not, we'll see you then.
Can I, if you are still watching,
okay,
tell me, Twitter, my Twitter is here. Tell me if you'd want to do a Twitter space, because maybe for one of those like bigger moves, we could do a Twitter space, and then other people who could talk and stuff. So yeah, if you're still listening, just tweet and say, hey, I'd love to do a space.
Absolutely. So, alrighty, well, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you guys back on the 6th if we don't have anything big happen before then.